Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. And last week, the people of Hartlepool voted to change their MP from Labour to the Conservatives after having already switched their council to the Conservatives a couple of years before. The town, whose demographic has been shifting more towards typical Tory voters, think they're going to be reaping the benefits of Brexit in the form of a Freeport. But in this video, I'd like to poke at some of the lies in the scheme that will actually deal them greater levels of deprivation than they've already faced after a decade of Tory rule. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I've discussed in the past the nonsense of the post-Brexit idea of Freeports. It's been bouncing around for a few years now. Freeports are actually quite damaging to the local community. But it's not an easy thing to get through to people who are unfamiliar with what they are. The Conservatives told people that you could only get Freeports after leaving the EU, which meant that, well, Freeports must be amazing. But a couple of things immediately. One, there are Freeports in the EU. In fact, we used to have Freeports until quite recently, in fact. It was the Conservative government that removed the last of them. The second thing is the idea of a Freeport is to basically let people get away without paying duty. Essentially, you know, the people of Hartlepool and other Brexit voting towns support the idea of good public services, but public services need to be paid for from taxes, and Freeports reduce the overall level of tax revenues that the government have to spend on public services. In other words, falling for the idea that Freeports would be a good idea is on the same level as falling for any of the lies that the Brexiteers told you. You can see it in terms of what Freeports actually do around the world. Now, studies have shown that they don't actually generate jobs. They generally just move jobs from one area to another. The government will say it will encourage people to set up jobs in these Freeport areas. Yes, it will. But it won't be new jobs. It'll be jobs that already exist somewhere in the country. Now, that could still work for Boris Johnson politically, because in order to keep his promise to the north of England, he could use Freeports to shift jobs from where they currently exist to areas with higher unemployment, you know, like Hartlepool and Liverpool, the sites of these Freeports. But you don't actually increase the number of jobs in the country unless they create conditions that give you a competitive edge internationally. Nothing in these plans does that. At best, all it does is, as I say, move jobs from one place to another. Now, for the people who will benefit from the new jobs in their areas, other areas will lose them. But it's even worse than that, because you could look at that as at least a redistribution of jobs, which would be fine if we had high employment, but we're having increasing unemployment as a result of Tory rule. But Emily Thornberry, who's Labour's Shadow Minister for International Trade, has written to her counterpart in the government, Liz Truss. In it, she points out that she had previously asked why Freeports weren't mentioned in the report for driving up exports, jobs and growth if they were going to be a key part of the strategy. She didn't get an answer to this, which is quite interesting in itself. If the government are going to go, oh yeah, Freeports, that's the answer. It's like, okay, so when you wrote a report about how you're going to drive growth and exports, why didn't you mention it then? But she followed up with a query which was exposed in the Financial Times that Freeports, or the Freeports that the government are planning, won't even really get the tariff reductions that are supposed to be the whole point of them, for the government at least. See, here's what people have been told about Freeports. They've been told that, yeah, Brexit's brought some trade barriers for exporting around the world. We get that, yeah. But what we're going to do, right, cunning plan, we're going to use Freeports to get around that. So as long as the goods never make it into Britain proper, so you have raw materials coming into your Freeports, you have your factories in the Freeports, the factories turn those raw materials into a thing, and then you export the goods back out. And they won't be subject to tariffs, and we won't have to mess about with tariffs on the imports, and it's all great, it's fantastic, brilliant. Which, before I get into the problem, I need to point out what that means. It means a Freeport has to be separated from the rest of the country. You know how we were joking about the border around Kent? Funny story. That means you face customs checks from passing from one part of the country to another. The Freeport is in some ways like being part of a different country, or at least not part of your own, from a customs point of view. I wonder how many people in Hartlepool will fancy facing customs checks just to leave part of their own town. But anyway, on to where the argument falls down, because there's been a few holes identified in the government's plan, and officials have had to admit that because of our piss poor trade deals around the world, manufacturers operating in those free ports won't actually be able to skip out on the tariffs if they export to certain countries. And those countries include some major markets like Canada, Norway, Switzerland, Singapore and so on. And the embarrassing part is this. It's not an oversight, really. It's not that they forgot to get those benefits in their trade agreements. There are clauses actively in the trade agreements that they negotiated and signed that specifically prevent this. Now, this is quite normal, we're told. These clauses, nothing unusual about them. No one's pulled a fast one on us. It is standard that free ports don't benefit from the sort of arrangements that the government assumed that they did when they came up with their post-Brexit plan. Another example of what happens if you dismiss officials who know what they're doing and install yes men instead. You know, with our pre-Brexit civil service and advisors, you would imagine this would have been pointed out to ministers before we signed anything, really. So the government have been talking about free ports being a major way in which they aim to get post-Brexit growth powered up. They'd planned for this for some time, right? But when they were arranging these trade agreements, they specifically signed up to clauses that stops their free ports plan even working. In fact, this is how hilariously tragic this is. A factory in one of these free ports, because the idea is to generate jobs in these areas. The government say, well, we'll put this free port there so people will be encouraged to build their factories there. A factory in a free port will have to face duties when they export goods to one of these countries, but a factory somewhere else in Britain wouldn't have to. Now, the whole point of the free ports is to encourage manufacturers to set up there to benefit from, duty-free imports and exports. And yet factories outside of the free ports will be able to export to those 23 countries much more easily. And just to emphasise the importance of these countries, they were the destination of 10% of our total goods exported in 2019, which was the last full year of trade not buggered by either COVID or Brexit. In addition, given that these are not EU countries we're talking about, they are the sort of markets that our Brexit government keep encouraging businesses to export more to. When businesses say, we can't export to the EU anymore, it's too expensive or whatever they go, you need to expand your customers in these areas. Well, now you've knackered those markets as well if anyone wants to build in these free ports. Because that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to try and sell more to these other markets to compensate for the loss of trade with our EU neighbours. This is a spectacular level of incompetence right here. They have literally signed agreements that make it impossible to enact their plans to maintain this post-Brexit manufacturing nirvana in our country. And Thornberry points out in her letter to Trust that 10 of the offending trade agreements were signed after the Treasury became aware of the issue last year. So it took them longer to become aware of the issue than it should have done, given that this was supposed to be a government plan. But then the Treasury became aware of it, and they still signed 10 further trade agreements with the clause in there that completely knackers the plan. Someone's dropped a massive bollock here, haven't they? They really have. As a result, of course, of Boris Johnson's lack of joined-up thinking on anything. He seems to encourage a form of government where no part knows what other parts are doing, no coordination, so this sort of thing is going to keep happening. So the people of Hartlepool, and the other areas getting free ports dumped on them, are going to have all the disadvantages of crap jobs, crap wages, customs checks to move around their own bloody town, less money for public services, and the factories that are intended to set up in these places won't necessarily even get the benefits unless the government renegotiates these clauses. Can you imagine this? This might be a Millennium Dome thing. They'll set up these free ports and go, right, businesses, there you go, we'll set them up for you. And what if the business community then goes, right, we don't really see the benefit here. We're not actually going to do that. And what you'll have created is like 8 wastelands around the country. Maybe there's a reason that the Conservative government got rid of the free ports we actually had. Just putting that out there. And let's say the government do renegotiate the clauses in these agreements that are already on equal or worse terms than we had as EU members. What are we going to have to concede in return? So the net result will be even worse agreements from our point of view. Or maybe, maybe these countries will just let us remove these fairly standard clauses at no cost to us, even though they know we'll be desperate and we will give them whatever they ask for to do it. Who knows? I don't know. In which case, why don't the government just do that? They knew about this issue last year. Why haven't they done it? Why didn't they do this when it was all pointed out to them in 2020? Your guess is as good as mine. With this Brexit government, it's sometimes hard to know whenever they screw things up for the country if they're doing it out of malice or incompetence. Because sometimes in screwing over the country, they enrich themselves. But I think on this occasion, it's probably fair to say that this is incompetence. Because it doesn't really do them or their plans any good at all. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.